Have other HBCUs reached out to y'all?
We've been in contact with other head coaches from HBCU. I turned down the Jackson State job to come here, Roland Martin. Jackson State called me. Deion Sanders called me himself, man. Gave me everything that Ed is saying is accurate. There have been other offers before Bethune-Cookman in previous years from other
Grambling
from bro. So,
I'm sorry, bro.
From other HBCUs, there's been opportunities for Ed to be a head coach at multiple colleges. This was an opportunity. The location, the campus, everything about Bethune-Cookman was extremely appealing, which led him to ultimately choosing this over the opportunity at other institutions.
You know, it just hit me, y'all. All of us are Ed Reed, or Ed Reed is all of us. Everybody gets collectively like this with this whole Ed Reed Bethune-Cookman situation. We all are just holding our face in our hands right now. We're all face palming. We had to get the group chat going for this one. What a week it's been when it comes to Bethune-Cookman University. We got Dr. Jason Johnson, we got Carron Phillips, and we got Dawn Montgomery. Start with you, Jason. Professor, what have we learned through this entire ordeal?
If there were a living meme of the guy with like 12 cigarettes in his hands with his face just like that's how I feel. That's how I feel watching this. What we have seen, the biggest takeaway in the last week, which is what I said last week on the show, Bethune-Cookman had every right and reason to fire Ed Reed. He demonstrated without any question on the air with Roland Martin, and I watched it live, that he lacks the temperament, the discipline, the focus, and the communication skills to be the most prominent face on that campus. A separate issue, which we will get into, is that Bethune-Cookman is a mess. That was never in doubt. But the conversation was not about whether or not Bethune-Cookman was an organized university or institution. It was whether or not Ed Reed's behavior warranted being fired. And I think that between the IG Live, the weird statements that he made after his contract was canceled, and the interview with Roland Martin, it is abundantly clear that they made the right decision. Whether or not we can keep this conversation focused on Bethune-Cookman as opposed to slamming on HBCUs, which is what Ed Reed did, that'll be the important thing moving forward.
And we're definitely coming back to that. Carron, if Bethune-Cookman University had listened to you, they'd have never hired Ed Reed in the first place, because right here on this here program, Jason referenced how he took us to church last week. Right here on this here program, you told us what time it was with Deion Sanders at Jackson State from the beginning. So I'll ask you the same thing I asked Jason. What have we learned from this entire ordeal this past week or so?
It's bigger than this past last week. It's been about the last 2-3 years since Deion Sanders took the job at Jackson State. What we have learned is that, and I wrote that in my Deadspin column for this morning. Too many Black and white people who have no idea how HBCUs work. Our culture, our history, what we go through, why the things we don't have. It's probably because some state board or somewhere, no matter if the HBCU is public or private, hasn't given us the money that we've owned, if we've been in these holes trying to climb out. All of a sudden, just because your cousin, your daddy went to some HBCU, or you went to a couple homecomings, or
you watched A Different World.
Oh, you watched A Different World. You use lotion, and because you're Black and like hot sauce, you now know what the Black folks should be doing at they Black schools. Now, mind you, most of these Black folks think these Black schools are beneath these white schools that they attend. But you want to show up in 2020 when this racial reckoning is supposed to happen takes place. Over, hey, I want to go to Howard homecoming. I want to go to A&T homecoming. I want to go to Spellhouse homecoming. Then you rock with us. But when it's time to listen to us and shut up and be quiet and sit out of situations because you get tired of the microaggressions you've done at these PWIs and you realize that you should have brought your ass home like the smart ones did, Now you've got all these situations, and you're sitting up here in these DEI meetings at your job, and you're like, well, this is what we should do to donate to these HBCUs when you don't know nothing. And then this conversation happened, and it was like, yeah, let's hire the great football player who don't know nothing about coaching or running the program, and let him put a spotlight on these programs. These programs been had spotlight. You just weren't paying attention. You just didn't care. But when it's something sexy like Prime or Ed Reed show up, now you all of a sudden are some historian on how these campuses and universities work when you haven't even grasped the idea to talk to somebody who has HBCU credits. Don't nobody give a damn about athletes on HBCU campuses or those sports. They are always at the bottom of the social climate and ladder. So if you expect us now to pour all this money and thoughts and prayers and cares into athletics and football, that ain't why we was created. That ain't why we've thrived and survived. Football is cool. Sports are great. Do we need to get better at them? Yes. But that ain't why you come here. If you want to go and be a cheerleader and you want your team to be in the CFP, go Power 5, go to the SEC, go to the Big Ten. If you want to be a better person and a better human being, come on home.
I had a feeling y'all would take us to church today. Dawn, you were getting a word a second ago. You were passing the collection plate. You passed on some facts on your Twitter account because, I mean, when I saw the Roland Martin interview, and props to Roland for the work he's done covering this story, when I saw the Roland Martin clip of Ed saying, I turned down Jackson State, Prime called me. I'm like, damn, I didn't know Deion was hiring on the way out. I didn't know he had it like that. At least that's the way it came off. But you clarified what actually went down at Jackson State. And beyond that, what have we learned, Dawn?
I mean, overall, like, a hit dog is going to holler. We'll start there. Everyone knows that. And I feel like when he had to come out and be defensive and say, I turned down the Jackson State job. He wants someone to feel him. He wants someone to understand that he's hurt. But he has to check his ego first and foremost, because although Deion might have called him to kind of follow up with him, because yes, the AD, Ashley Robertson at Jackson State, as well as the president, Dr. Thomas Hudson at Jackson State, were both talking about considering him for the head coaching position there. Just because you go to a school or you get a phone call or you visit, even have maybe 1 or 2 interviews, that does not mean that you've actually gotten the job. That does not mean that they have actually offered you something. And I just, in the midst of all of this, one of the things that I just feel like we should all be mindful of, there's a current coach there now who is stepping into those shoes that are going to be pretty big to fill, but at the same time, he doesn't want the limelight. He doesn't want cameras everywhere to show that he can do the job that he's doing. And I want to shout out TC Taylor, because he is doing his job. He's been recruiting. He's been working with the team. The team knows him, and he's ready for this shift. But for someone like Ed Reed to be acting out like this is the main reason why BCU could not have hired him, because they weren't ready for that type of visibility. They weren't ready for these types of conversations that are being had now. As you know, we've all stated both things can be true. BCU necessarily did not even have the foundation to even utter the words that they were going to try to bring someone like that onto campus to try to create more visibility around the athletic department. So I just think that it's a difficult thing to kind of see this man act out publicly the way that he's been doing. But I think what we've kind of seen from other coaches here and there, I think it's kind of up to par to how he feels that he's been mistreated and things like that overall.
And to quickly add something that Don just said, by Ed Reed saying that, he either dry snitched or somebody's lying. Because I vividly remember, since Coach Prime loves to put everything on film and post it on social media, he sat in a team meeting after he announced that he was leaving and said, I know who I want to be our next coach, and it's TC. So if you wanted him to be the coach, then how did you also call Ed Reed? So either Ed Reed dry snitched on his boy, or Deion lied in front of his team about his support for TC. And if you would have listened to me, you never would have hired either of these clowns, and we wouldn't have to deal with anything.
But so we just saw the video.
I want to add also to this, Michael.
Okay, go ahead. You got
because I think part of what everybody else is pointing out here is that we've got two separate conversations going on by Ed Reed, and I think a lot of it sometimes is confusing. Then we're clarifying, we're always clarifying. You can have a conversation about what's happening in HBCU athletics, and you can have a conversation about these celebrity former NFL guys coming in and playing, and one doesn't necessarily have to bleed into the other the same way. And what we're seeing here is a lot of times it's being conflated, and the people who are suffering happen to be a bunch of kids down on a campus that's had financial problems for 15 to 20 years now, and they're not necessarily being heard the way they need to be heard because their educational problems go much deeper than anything Ed Reed was going to be able to fix.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, the protests about the conditions, the mold, the mildew, what have you, the infrastructural issues, or about just the athletic issues, or even the protests, against the board of trustees wanting Ed Reed to be reinstated, yada yada yada. There are issues at Bethune-Cookman University, just like there are issues at all institutions. At many HBCUs, at PWIs, there are issues worth protesting, there are issues worth fighting for. So, talk about two things can be true at the same time. Ed Reed could not be fit to coach. The university could determine that he's not fit to coach, and there still could be issues that the university needs to address. But the thing that rubbed me the wrong way during that FaceTime that he had with Deion, when he was broadcasting his goodbye to the team, is Deion saying, hey, you already know what it is. Sometimes you got to walk away. I know what you're going through. It's like, are we all family? We all connected? Yes. HBCUs are obviously connected, right? They may share a similar mission, a shared experience. But what went down with Deion has nothing to do with what went down with Ed Reed at Bethune-Cookman University. And what bothers me about it is only with black people is something a reflection or a referendum on all of us. It's like, so why is this an opportunity for, it's the conversation to go to a place where it's like, this is what's wrong with all HBCUs. It's like they might as well just say, well, this is the problem with all black people, or this is why we can't have nothing. It's like, no. This is specific to Ed Reed and Bethune-Cookman University, not some kind of negative reflection or stereotype that's being perpetuated about HBCUs at large, Carron.
Like, Mike, what you saw in that IG Live when he jumped in was a quitter and someone who pimped Jackson State and HBCU culture tell Ed Reed, hey, go ahead and quit too like I did, dog. And what's funny about that is that the quitter told Ed Reed to quit when Ed Reed hadn't even filled out a W-2 yet. Like, that dude didn't even have his direct deposit information on file in the school. That's how quick they got him up out of there. And so that was the thing. When I found out when scrolling Twitter and saw that Deion had jumped into that life, I already knew what he was going to say. Because I saw it, I think he was on The View giving advice to what, because they were talking about the subject, to what Ed Reed should do. And I'm like, look, unless he is telling you how to be the greatest cornerback of all time, how to be a two-sport athlete, or how to return punts or kicks, do not listen to Deion Sanders' advice about anything.
Dawn, what was that about from your perspective?
From my perspective, that was a moment for two men who have this ego and have this thought of who they are and how the world should work for them. And they were trauma bonding, you know what I'm saying? In a sense where it's like, well, I went through that too. So I can tell you a little bit about that. But here's the thing with Deion that I think people are getting tired of seeing on my timeline is that, number one, I'm not going to say his name too many more times because the man has decided where he's going to go and I need him to move on. Number two, what is it so bad about Jackson State and the way that Jackson State opened up their campus, their doors, their facilities, all of the things. And whether he contributed towards that to make things better, yes, he did. We've never discounted anything that he had brought to the table over at Jackson State. But Jackson State foundationally was more prepared to welcome in someone with that big of an ego and that big of presence and say, hey, you don't have this coaching resume. We see that you want to step into this and get to the next level. We want to give you the space to do that because, again, I've talked about this ad nauseum on my timeline. Our HBCUs show up as spaces for us to grow, for us to learn, for us to be better as people, for us to come together as a community and to be safe. And right now, the narratives that they are pushing aren't safe because here it is, you got more Black men and or Black student athletes who are agreeing with some of these things and nobody's talking about solutions. If you have all this money, then why don't you fix it? But you can't because it's a systemic racism situation. So we have it's even bigger than what their egos tend to be whenever they show up on our timelines, and they just want somebody to agree with them in the moment, and they don't realize the damage that they're causing in the midst of all of this. If it's really about the student athletes, if it's really about the students, then push the limelight more on them rather than how you feel as a grown man, knowing that you got bills to pay and you may not have a job tomorrow because you're running your mouth.
Jason?
I'm going to say this, and it's a great quote from Michael and Jay-Z. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't. All this really kind of goes back to money and some numbers that I think get missed in this context, which is one of the reasons I was so critical of Ed Reed. Number one, when people are talking about HBCUs, can we remind the audience there's 106 HBCUs in America? 106. Most people can only name 12. So you can't make general statements about HBCUs, Ed Reed or Deion Sanders, when you have 106 institutions. That's the first thing. Not all of them even have athletics departments. So that's the other issue. But here's something else to put this into context. The New York City Police Department, I looked this up. The 1 year annual budget for the New York City Police Department is more than the endowment of all 106 HBCUs combined. The budget for 1 year of the New York City Police Department is $10 billion. That's more than 106 of our institutions. So when you talk about what we can and cannot do, you've got to look at what has been systematic denial of adequate resources to state and private institutions for a century. I am here in Maryland, in the state of Maryland, which is a blue state. After a 15-year lawsuit, the state of Maryland has agreed to pay $577 million to the HBCUs in the state because of systematic denial of funding. That took 15 years. And that's Maryland, a blue state. So what do you think is happening to Black schools in Alabama and Texas and Florida and Jackson? And when private schools and public schools are denied in this way, this is where you get these problems. This was the conversation that Deion doesn't want to have and that Ed doesn't want to have. They want to come in and attack these schools and scream and yell and say it's a general problem and not discuss the roots of the issues. And let me also say this, because this is what everybody wants to respond with. Well, you know what? We need to give more to our schools, blah, blah, blah. I promise you, if every single graduate of Bethune-Cookman College from 1980 to present gave $1,000 a year, it's still a drop in the bucket from what they would get from the kind of funding that you can get from state or private resources, which our schools are systematically denied.
And you know what makes this even worse is that probably the four of us will be having the same conversation in a couple months because a little breaking news today. Y'all remember that story about Marcus Stokes, the QB, the recruit who lost his scholarship at Florida for saying the N-word? Well, he just got an offer from Albany State. So here we go again. Here we go.
Come on, Albany State.
No, but Carron, you wrapped up your column today with there's no point in putting a spotlight on something if you're not going to be around long enough to see it through. Where does Bethune-Cookman in particular, given the issues that were present before Ed Reed got there, clearly, where does Bethune-Cookman University in particular, but also this spotlight, where does it go? I hate to say the conversation, because to your point, some of us are jumping in and out of this conversation conveniently, whereas for many people, this conversation is ongoing. Okay, I'm talking to a professor at Morgan State University. So where does it go from here, Carron? And I'll go to all of you guys with that. Where does it go from here?
It's going to go the same way it always goes. If you paid attention to HBCUs and how we're viewed upon by America as a whole, and that's all races and colors. We have these ebbs and flows. Remember the 90s and all the gear that you saw in 90s black television shows and everybody repping stuff and wearing schools, the height of Freaknik and a different world we were talking about off the back of school dates and all of these things. And then, we had the spotlight then. Then it goes away a little bit. Then something happens in corporate America. Remember that we're here, and it's like, oh, they have these really good bands and they dance. Oh my God. And they step. What is this? And then these moments happen, right? And it's like, but every time a moment happens, everybody forget that there were moments in the past that happened. Oh yes. And another decade or so, we'll have another one of these moments. And that's what's so frustrating, is that a lot of the work, a lot of the attention, and a lot of the progress and improvement happens when the spotlight isn't on. And that's what I wrote about. It was like, that's what's so frustrating about Ed Reed and Deion Sanders, was if they just would have stayed for one recruiting class, or been there for 5, 6, 7 years and actually built a program, you could have seen that spotlight last a little longer and seen the progress and the good things that do come from these moments. But it's when things happen at the flick of a switch, you don't see the work that gets done in the dark. And that's the thing that angers me about this. And I always feels like the Ed Reeds and the Deion Sanders know that. So they hop in when the spotlight is on to get in and help themselves. And then when they know that light is getting ready to get snatched out the socket, that's when they dip and slide out.
Right. Dawn, what's your final thought?
So my final thoughts kind of go towards acknowledging one of the other HBCUs that has not been in the conversation because they don't necessarily have athletics, and that's Morris Brown College and what Dr. Kevin James has been doing over there and the hard reset and rebuilding and getting the accreditation back and things like that. But one of the things that he just more recently did was that Senator Jon Ossoff from the state of Georgia was able to secure funding for Morris Brown.
Right.
1 second. So
Tell somebody.
Sorry about that, y'all.
Tell that person
I'm
you're having
back.
a very important. Tell them
I
you're having a very
know,
important
it's okay.
conversation. Okay.
So Senator Jon Ossoff was able to secure funding for Morris Brown, and that's where the next conversation needs to go in this, is knowing that you have senators, you have state representatives, you have city council people, you have politicians that have to step in and understand how important it is for these students to have better housing, better accommodations, just overall a better experience at these HBCUs. If you're going to hold back the money, where's the money that we really do need in order to change things so that these narratives can kind of die down? I feel like we're going to consistently hear somebody come back and forth and say, well, at least the Ed Reed was right. At least some of the things that Deion had to share was correct. But in the midst of that, where are the actual solutions? And one of the parts of the solutions is really kind of finding the people that can find the funding and make the things happen that we need to make happen at these HBCUs.
And quickly before Jason goes, Morris Brown lost their accreditation my freshman year at Morehouse. That was 2003.
Right.
Look how long it's taken for them to get back. Like I was there for that last year at Moabit before things crumbled. So shout out to them for coming back and the AUC being whole again. Sorry, Jason, go ahead.
No, that's okay. We got dogs barking.
I just want to say this quick.
A last word with Dr. Jason Johnson. Take us home.
I just want to say this. We need to stop looking for saviors for our institutions, and we need to stop giving people space to claim they're saviors. Okay? Look, I have about as much faith in Ed Reed or Deion Sanders to build and recreate and organize a school as I do Umar Johnson. Okay? Like, no, none of these people have the skill set. Okay? These institutions have lots of issues. In some cases, that have to do with athletics. In some instances, they don't have any problems with athletics. We have to look at these individuals as men and women taking jobs and then cover them as people taking jobs. Ed Reed is not there to be the daddy of these students. Ed Reed was not there to be the savior. He allowed himself to present that way. Some people gave him credit for that, but it is a job. That would have meant following the students, keeping up with their grades, kicking some of those guys out of the program. This is real work. And I think all too often what we miss, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation because we're hitting on it, is that these are institutions worthy of respect, worthy of discipline, and worthy of professionalism. And if you're not capable of doing that, if the first time you receive any sort of brushback, you're crying like Boys to Men at the Grammys, then you ain't up for the job. And I'm sure there are dozens of men and women across the country who will be willing to go into these institutions and fight the good fight long term, not just for the students, but also for the student athletes. And those are the people that I hope we're focusing on in the future. And these celebrity folks stop stunt casting themselves into positions that they were never committed to begin with.
Not a better way to end it than that. Jason, Dawn, Carron, we appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for the conversation. Let's definitely keep it going. Appreciate all you guys have written, said, and tweeted about these issues, both in the dark and in the light, as you said, Carron. Appreciate y'all. Thank you.
And what happened to Dr. Umar's school?
What?
He told
Hey, thank you for watching Brother from Another. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, go ahead and do that now. Don't forget you can catch us 3 to 4 weekdays on PeacockTV.com and on Sirius XM Channel 85.